And it's been like that all my life, you know. People have either really accepted what I do or they absolutely sort of push it away from them.
He never lived inside one skin. He didn't follow eras, he invented them. David Bowie was not searching for identity. He was proving that identity itself could become art. Every time the world caught up, he slipped away again. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, the Berlin Ghost, each one a new mask. Each mask a new revelation. To Bowie, transformation wasn't escape. It was oxygen. He believed that art should never stand still. That the moment you become predictable, you stop being alive. And for more than 5 decades, he never stopped moving. Glam, soul, electronic, noise to him, genres were costumes, and truth was what hid beneath them. What if the key to his evolution, to all those strange and beautiful transformations, was hidden inside the music he loved most? Because behind every Bowie era, there were echoes. 6 albums that didn't just inspire him but rewired him. Albums that taught him that beauty can live inside chaos, and that danger is the purest form of honesty. Today, we'll step inside that mirror, the one where Bowie found himself reflected through the artists he worshipped. From the Velvet Underground to Iggy Pop, this is not a list. It's a map of transformation, the blueprint of how David Bowie became timeless. If you love stories that peel back the layers of legends, make sure you subscribe and join our journey. Hit the like button, tap the bell, and stay with us until the end, because the music that shaped Bowie might just reshape how you see art itself. Now, let's begin. Number 1. The Velvet Underground and Nico. Before Bowie became a star, he was just a young man listening in the dark. The radio was too safe, too clean, too ordinary. He wanted something that bled, something that made the walls shake and the air feel electric. Then, one night, he heard the Velvet Underground and Nico. A banana on the cover, noise on the inside, truth in between. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pretty. And that's exactly why Bowie fell in love with it. While the rest of London was still chasing pop perfection, he was drawn to the chaos, the whisper that turned into a scream, the poetry hiding inside the filth. He began covering "I'm Waiting for the Man" in small clubs when no one even knew who Lou Reed was. To most people, that music sounded wrong. To Bowie, it sounded real. The Velvets didn't try to be beautiful, they tried to be honest. And honesty, he realized, was far more dangerous. Songs like Heroin and Venus in Furs didn't rebel through noise, they rebelled through truth. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of fame. It was confession through distortion. That was the spark Bowie had been waiting for. He once said, "The Velvets gave us permission to be strange." To him, that wasn't a metaphor. It was a mission statement. When he later sculpted Low and Black Star, that same DNA was their discomfort as beauty, confession as creation. He understood that being misunderstood was part of being alive. The Velvet Underground didn't just inspire him. They gave him a mirror, and when he looked into it, he didn't see a musician. He saw a shapeshifter, someone willing to destroy every version of himself to find the next. It was the beginning of something no one else saw coming. But before Bowie became the alien from Mars, he met the preacher who showed him that the stage could be a pulpit and the screen could be holy. Number 2. The Fabulous Little Richard. Before the glitter, before Ziggy, before the alien eyeshadow and the lightning bolt, there was a boy in post-war London named David Jones. He was quiet, curious, and a little strange. Music was polite back then until he heard a sound that cracked open the sky. That sound was Little Richard. Bowie would later say, hearing Little Richard for the first time was like seeing God. It wasn't just music, it was revelation. The scream, the swagger, the divine chaos, it was everything the grey world around him wasn't. For the first time, he realized that music didn't have to behave. It could shout, sparkle, and demand to be seen. When The Fabulous Little Richard came out, it wasn't an album to Bowie. It was permission. Permission to be loud, to be beautiful, to be dangerous. Richard's falsetto wasn't just a voice, it was defiance wrapped in joy. His piano didn't play songs, it detonated them. And Bowie, a teenage kid clutching his saxophone, felt something shift inside him. The boundaries fell away. The idea of normal dissolved. That's where Ziggy was born, long before he ever touched a stage. Little Richard showed him that art could be a performance of identity, that exaggeration could be truth. The wild costumes, the makeup, the theatrical gestures, they weren't masks, they were revelations. He wasn't hiding behind characters. He was expressing the parts of himself the world wasn't ready for. Years later, when Bowie danced under alien lights, you could still hear that echo of Richard's scream. That electric defiance, that fearless joy. He once said that Little Richard had the energy I wanted to find in myself. And he did. Every future version of Bowie Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke, carried the same spirit of holy rebellion that Little Richard unleashed in him. It was the moment Bowie realized that sound could transform the soul, that a voice could set you free. But freedom always leads to curiosity, and curiosity would soon lead Bowie into something new, a sound that would fracture and rebuild rock itself. Number 3, Pixies, Doolittle.
Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
By the late 80s, David Bowie had already reinvented himself more times than most artists even attempt. Ziggy had burned bright and vanished. The Thin White Duke had faded into the Berlin shadows, and Bowie had long since become his own genre, an unpredictable collision of sound, color, and philosophy. Yet, even then, he still hungered for something new, something that could shake him awake again. That's when he discovered the Pixies. The first time he heard Doolittle in 1988, it didn't sound like anything else. It was like static from another planet, a mix of chaos and precision that made him stop whatever he was doing. Quiet verses collapsed into explosions. Beauty turned into absurdity, and then back into beauty again. Bowie called them the psychotic Beatles. He meant it as the highest compliment possible. What struck him wasn't just the noise, it was the architecture. Every song felt like a building that was constantly breaking apart and rebuilding itself. There was violence and humor, irony and purity, all tangled together. Charles Black Francis Thompson screamed like a man exorcising himself, while Joey Santiago's guitar painted abstract shapes in the air. It wasn't melody. It was energy sculpted into form. Bowie recognized that energy instantly. He'd spent his entire life chasing it, that strange pulse between control and collapse, the moment when art stops being safe and starts feeling alive. Doolittle reminded him that rock didn't need to be beautiful. It needed to be honest, unpredictable, slightly deranged. When Bowie listened to Monkey Gone to Heaven or Debaser, he didn't just hear songs, he heard ideas, he heard possibilities. The Pixies were proof that the future could still sound strange, that there were still frontiers left to explore. In the early 90s, Bowie began performing Pixies covers on stage, not as imitation but as communion. It was one shapeshifter saluting another. He wasn't chasing youth or trend, he was celebrating creativity in its rawest form. To Bowie, Doolittle was a reminder that reinvention doesn't end when you've seen it all, it begins again the moment you dare to listen. He said once that what fascinated him about the Pixies was their imagination, that they illuminated the subject, meaning they turned confusion into clarity, madness into meaning. It was exactly what Bowie had done for decades, finding beauty in distortion, turning discomfort into melody, and making strangeness feel sacred. The Pixies taught him that noise could still speak truth, that rebellion could still have rhythm, and that sincerity didn't have to sound clean. For Bowie, Doolittle wasn't nostalgia, it was resurrection. And yet, even resurrection has a shadow. Because the artist who constantly reinvents himself eventually meets a deeper question. What happens when the noise fades? When the chaos ends, and all that's left is the voice trembling, human, and exposed? That question would lead Bowie straight into the darkness of another artist. A voice that wasn't trying to impress, but to haunt. Number 4, Scott Walker. Night Flights. By the late 70s, David Bowie had already lived several lifetimes. Ziggy was gone, burned out in a blaze of glitter and melancholy. The Thin White Duke had dissolved into the smoke of Berlin's cold nights. He had experimented with isolation, with sound, with silence itself. But even as he created Low and Heroes, Bowie was searching for something deeper, not fame, not reinvention, but revelation. Then he found Scott Walker. Walker was never just a singer to Bowie. He was a mystery, a ghostly presence whose voice sounded both human and divine, filled with sorrow yet sharp with control. When Bowie first heard Night Flights, he didn't hear a comeback record. He heard a transformation, a descent into darkness that refused to explain itself. It was an album that didn't beg to be understood, it demanded to be felt. Walker's music terrified and fascinated him. It sounded like fear turned into art. Orchestral dread layered with whispers of beauty, silence stitched into chaos. Where most artists sought clarity, Walker sought shadows. And that, Bowie realized, was the truest kind of honesty. He studied Night Flights obsessively, the way Walker twisted melody into confession, the way each lyric felt like something overheard in a dream. Bowie once said that Walker had invented a new way to think about the voice. He didn't mean technique, he meant intention. Walker wasn't singing, he was revealing. That influence began to bleed into Bowie's own work. You can hear it in Outside, Earthling, and finally, Black Star. The willingness to let silence speak, to let discomfort breathe. The courage to sing about fear without disguising it as entertainment. Walker taught Bowie that mystery was not the opposite of truth, it was truth, disguised in echo and decay. When Walker later sent Bowie a birthday message, Bowie whispered, "I see God in the window." It wasn't exaggeration. It was reverence. He saw in Scott Walker the kind of artist he always wanted to become, one who didn't chase applause but meaning. One who could disappear into the sound and still leave a shadow behind. Walker's influence changed Bowie's understanding of art. It showed him that the artist's purpose isn't to be understood, but to haunt the listener long after the song ends. To make people feel the weight of what can't be said. That lesson became part of Bowie's final decade, the slow, deliberate transformation from legend to myth. Night Flights wasn't just a record to him. It was a mirror showing him his future. A reminder that even legends can vanish into the music and still remain eternal. And from that haunted silence, Bowie heard something mechanical. Something that pulsed like a heartbeat made of circuits. He had mastered emotion. Now he wanted to master precision. Number 5. Kraftwerk. Trans-Europe Express. Berlin, mid-70s. Bowie wandered the cold streets like a man split between two worlds, the chaos of his past and the silence of his rebirth. The city was grey, industrial, and endlessly humming. Its rhythm wasn't human, it was mechanical, pulsing through the air like the inside of a machine. And that's when he heard Kraftwerk. Their music wasn't rock, wasn't pop, wasn't anything that could be defined. It was geometry. It was architecture. Circuits turned into rhythm, emotion translated into code. Bowie listened to Autobahn during long drives across Germany, watching the landscape pass by like an endless dream of neon and fog. But it was Trans-Europe Express that truly changed him. This album wasn't about rebellion or confession. It was about precision, the sound of a future built by design. Where other artists screamed for attention, Kraftwerk whispered with intention. Their music didn't beg to be understood. It existed in perfect stillness, where every note felt inevitable. Bowie was obsessed. He said once that Kraftwerk made machines sound like they were breathing. That fascinated him, because Bowie had always tried to make emotions sound mechanical, the thin line between human warmth and digital detachment. In Kraftwerk, he found the mirror image of his own search. Trans-Europe Express became the blueprint for Bowie's Berlin trilogy Low, Heroes, and Lodger. He borrowed their discipline, their restraint, their belief that less could mean more. He stripped away the noise and left the pulse. Emotion without excess, humanity inside machinery. He admired their ability to turn repetition into revelation, to make silence swing harder than a drum beat. To Bowie, this wasn't about technology, it was about truth. He saw that even the most synthetic sound could carry soul, that circuitry could cry. He once said, "Where others heard coldness, I heard clarity." And that's what Kraftwerk gave him clarity. The understanding that progress doesn't erase emotion, it refines it. He realized that music could evolve endlessly, as long as it stayed curious. When Florian Schneider passed away, Bowie called Kraftwerk one of his favorite groups, saying they taught us to dream in binary. It was the perfect summary of what Trans-Europe Express represented to him, a dream built on precision, a future that still felt alive. Those robotic rhythms bled into his DNA. You can feel it in sound and vision, in Warzawa, in the metallic heartbeat that runs through Heroes. Kraftwerk didn't just influence Bowie, they rewired him. And yet, no matter how mechanical his sound became, Bowie never forgot that art needs chaos, that somewhere behind every perfect line, there must be a spark ready to explode. And there was only one man who embodied that spark. Because while Kraftwerk taught him control, Iggy Pop reminded him of danger. And together, they would create something raw, reckless, and immortal. Number 6, Iggy and the Stooges' Raw Power. No one fueled Bowie's chaos like Iggy Pop. They weren't just friends, they were reflections of each other. One born of precision, the other of pure instinct. One sculpted by control, the other burning with wild, self-destructive freedom. Together, they were fire and architecture, and the explosion that united them was Raw Power by Iggy and the Stooges. When Bowie first heard that record, it was like touching a live wire. It was violent, primal, unfiltered, everything polite music tried to avoid. He said it was the real energy of rock and roll, not the polished rebellion of stadium anthems, but something raw, animal, and almost dangerous to witness. By 1973, Raw Power was collapsing under its own chaos. The recordings were too rough, the production too broken. The label didn't understand it. So Bowie stepped in, not just as a producer, but as a believer. He mixed the album himself, chasing the sound of electricity burning through human skin. The result wasn't perfect, it was alive. Every shriek, every distorted edge, every ounce of blood and feedback pulsed like a living organism trapped inside a vinyl groove. That energy infected Bowie completely. It became the gasoline under the glitter, the pulse that powered Ziggy Stardust, and every incarnation that followed. He once said that Iggy was the energy I never had, but always wanted. To Bowie, Iggy represented truth, the kind of brutal honesty that can't be choreographed. Their friendship became legendary. They were two artists running from themselves, creating worlds to survive. Berlin became their laboratory. Bowie, the architect of emotion. Iggy, the poet of destruction. Together, they built something eternal, music that didn't hide the cracks, but glorified them. Raw Power wasn't just an album to Bowie, it was a pact. A blood oath that said, we will never fake it. We will never be safe. We will make art that hurts, bleeds, and burns because that's the only kind that means something. Even decades later, Bowie spoke about that record with reverence. He said it reminded him of what honesty sounded like, not polite, not polished, but true. To him, Raw Power was proof that destruction could be art, that chaos could purify. You can feel that legacy pulsing through Diamond Dogs, Station to Station, and even Black Star. That edge never left him. Because Bowie understood that creation and destruction are the same force, one tearing down the old to make room for the new. And that's what Iggy gave him, permission to fall apart beautifully, to lose control and find himself again inside the noise. Raw Power was more than music, it was survival. It roared with the sound of two friends who refused to disappear quietly. And long after the amplifiers went silent, Bowie still carried that roar inside him, a reminder that the most dangerous art is the one that dares to stay human. Music never really ends, it just changes shape. And no one embodied that truth more than David Bowie. He took the scream of Iggy, the discipline of Kraftwerk, the mysticism of Walker, the madness of the Pixies, the freedom of Little Richard, and the raw truth of the Velvet Underground, and turned them into galaxies of sound. These weren't just his influences. They were the constellations that guided him through every transformation. Every artist searches for a mirror, something that reflects not who they are, but who they could become. For Bowie, that mirror was made of sound. Each of these albums wasn't just inspiration. They were transformations, small deaths and rebirths stitched into melody. The Velvet Underground taught him to be strange. Little Richard showed him that chaos could be holy. The Pixies reminded him that reinvention never ends. Scott Walker whispered that darkness is where truth hides. Kraftwerk revealed that even machines can feel. And Iggy Pop, he showed him that destruction can set you free. Bowie didn't imitate them. He became them. He absorbed their worlds, broke them apart, and rebuilt them inside his own skin. That's why he never truly aged, because he never stopped evolving. His entire life was a performance of transformation. Every album, every persona, every silence between notes was a reminder that art is not about being understood. It's about daring to change. Maybe that's what we're all afraid of, change. But Bowie taught us that to change is to live twice. And to live twice is to leave something eternal behind. If this story made you pause, made you feel, or made you see Bowie in a new light, stay with us. Subscribe, like, and tap the bell. Not for the algorithm, but for the art. Because there are still more stories like this, stories of the dreamers, the rebels, and the ones who dared to sound like no one else.